Marcus Johnson sat nervously at the defendant's table in courtroom number 7. The 17-year-old kept his eyes down, his fingers tapping anxiously against his knee. Just last week, he had been focused on college applications and maintaining his perfect GPA. Now he faced criminal charges for something he knew he didn't do. "All rise for the Honorable Judge Eleanor Winters," the bailiff announced. Judge Winters swept into the courtroom, her black robe flowing behind her as she took her seat at the bench. She had been a judge for 15 years in this district. A reputation preceded her: firm, uncompromising, and known for handing down harsh sentences. Case number 47,292, State versus Marcus Johnson, the clerk read out. Charges of criminal vandalism at Westside High School. Judge Winters peered over her glasses at Marcus. Her expression hardened immediately. How does the defendant plead? Marcus's public defender, Tanya Rodriguez, stood. "Not guilty, Your Honor." The judge barely acknowledged the plea. "Bail?" The prosecutor, a sharp-suited man named Richard Davis, stepped forward. "The state requests bail be set at $5,000, Your Honor. The damage to school property exceeds $10,000. Tanya immediately objected. "Your Honor, my client has no prior record. He's an honor student with a 4.0 GPA. He has deep ties to the community and poses no flight risk whatsoever." Judge Winters waved her hand dismissively. "Bail is set at $5,000. Next case." Marcus turned to Tanya, panic in his eyes. His family couldn't afford that amount. Later that afternoon, Marcus sat with his mother and Tanya in a small conference room at the courthouse. "I don't understand," his mother said, her voice breaking. "The surveillance video only shows someone in a black hoodie. You can't even see their face. Half the kids at that school wear black hoodies." Tanya nodded. "The evidence is circumstantial at best. Marcus was seen near the school that evening for basketball practice, but the actual vandalism occurred 2 hours later. I went straight home after practice," Marcus insisted. "Mom was at work, but I video called my cousin Kevin Wright when I got home. We talked for over an hour while I made dinner." As they reviewed the case details, something strange caught Tanya's attention. Looking through the file, she noticed Judge Winters had been assigned to this case unusually quickly. Typically, case assignments were random, but this had been fast-tracked to her courtroom. "Has the judge ever shown interest in you before, Marcus?" Tanya asked. Marcus shook his head. "I never met her before today." That evening, Tanya stayed late at her office, reviewing Judge Winters' recent cases. A concerning pattern emerged. Over the past year, the judge had handed down significantly harsher sentences to minority defendants compared to white defendants with similar charges and backgrounds. Her phone rang. It was a court clerk she knew well. "Tanya, you need to know something about the Johnson case," the clerk whispered. "Judge Winters requested it specifically when she heard about it. She said something about teaching these kids a lesson. I thought you should know." Tanya's blood ran cold. This was beyond judicial discretion, the suggested bias. As she drove home that night, Tanya knew defending Marcus would be more complicated than she had initially thought. This wasn't just about proving his innocence anymore. They were up against something much more troubling. A judge who might have already decided his fate before hearing a single piece of evidence. The law office of the public defender was small and cramped. Papers covered every surface, and the fluorescent lights flickered overhead. Tanya Rodriguez had been working there for 6 years, but this case worried her more than usual. "Look at these," Tanya said, spreading out case files across her desk. Her colleague James peered over her shoulder. "All of these cases were handled by Judge Winters in the last year," she explained. "Notice anything?" James studied the documents. "The sentencing. It's not consistent." "Exactly. White defendants got probation or community service. Black and Hispanic defendants got jail time for nearly identical offenses." Tanya circled a number on one of the files. This white college student vandalized public property, causing $15,000 in damage. Judge Winters gave him 100 hours of community service. She pointed to Marcus's file. Marcus is accused of causing $10,000 in damage, and the prosecutor is pushing for 6 months in juvenile detention. Meanwhile, Marcus sat in his school counselor's office during lunch break. His mother had insisted he continue attending classes despite the charges. I'd known you since freshman year, Marcus, Ms. Paddle said. You've never been in trouble. Not even once. It doesn't seem to matter, Marcus replied, staring down at his hands. Some kids at school are already treating me differently. Your teachers and I are writing character statements for your lawyer, Ms. Patel assured him. Mr. Reynolds from the science department was especially upset about the charges. He said you're the most responsible lab assistant he's ever had. That afternoon, Marcus's basketball coach approached him after class. Johnson, I got something that might help your case, Coach Williams said, handing him a piece of paper. This is the sign-in sheet from practice that night. You are here until 6:30 p.m. The security cameras in the gym entrance can confirm that. Thank you, Coach, Marcus said, feeling a small spark of hope for the first time in days. Across town, Tanya was meeting with an unexpected visitor, a former clerk who had worked for Judge Winters 3 years ago. I saw Marcus's case in the news, the woman said nervously. I left the judge's office because I couldn't take it anymore. She'd strong opinions about young black men, especially from Marcus's neighborhood. Would you be willing to make a statement about what you observed? Tanya asked. The former clerk hesitated. I can't afford to make enemies in the legal community, but I'll think about it. That evening, Tanya received a call from the court reporter who had been present at Marcus's arraignment. I need to meet with you, but not at your office, the court reporter said in a hushed voice. Judge Winters said something after you left the courtroom. The microphone was still on, but I don't think she realized it. The next morning, Tanya and Marcus met with the prosecutor, Richard Davis, hoping to get the charges dropped. I have evidence that Marcus was home during the vandalism, Tanya explained, showing him the video call logs and witness statements. Davis seemed uncomfortable. Look, the DA's office is under pressure from the school board to make an example of this case. The superintendent and Judge Winters belong to the same country club. I'm sorry, we're proceeding with the charges. As they left the meeting, Tanya's phone buzzed. It was a text message from an unknown number with a video attachment. The message read, Security footage from the school that night. Shows someone else committing the vandalism. Police have this but didn't share it with you. Tanya looked at Marcus. Things just got interesting. We need to be careful, but I think we might have found what we need. Marcus nodded, a glimmer of hope returning to his eyes. So what's our next move? The courthouse buzzed with activity as Marcus and Tanya made their way through security. 3 weeks had passed since his arraignment, and today was the pre-trial hearing. Marcus wore a crisp button-down shirt his mother had ironed that morning. Remember what we discussed? Tanya whispered as they walked down the hallway. Let me do the talking. Judge Winters will try to provoke reactions. Stay calm no matter what. Marcus nodded, his stomach in knots. Courtroom number 7 was already half full. Marcus's mother sat in the front row, along with his basketball coach and Ms. Patel. Several of his teachers had taken time off work to show support. All rise, called the bailiff as Judge Winters entered. Her gaze immediately fell on Marcus, her lips tightening into a thin line. She looked annoyed by the crowd of supporters behind him. We're here for pre-trial motions in State v. Johnson, she announced. Let's begin. The prosecutor stood first. Your Honor, the state moves to include evidence of the defendant's social media activity, which includes photos of graffiti artwork. Tanya jumped to her feet. Objection. My client is an art student. Those are pictures of professional murals from a school field trip to an arts district. Judge Winters frowned. Overruled. The social media evidence will be admitted. Tanya tried again. Your Honor, if the prosecution can admit art appreciation posts, then surely we can admit evidence supporting my client's alibi. What alibi evidence? Judge Winters asked with obvious skepticism. We have video call logs proving Marcus was at home during the vandalism, verified by the service provider. We also have security footage showing someone else committing the crime. The judge's expression darkened. Where did you obtain this security footage? It was anonymously provided to the defense. According to the timestamp, it's from the school's east hallway camera at 8:42 p.m., exactly when the vandalism occurred. The prosecutor interjected, Your Honor, we weren't aware of this footage. Because you didn't share it, Tanya responded. The police report indicates all security footage was collected. This clip was never provided to us in discovery. Judge Winters banged her gavel. The court will take a 15-minute recess. Counsel, approach the bench. During the break, Marcus overheard fragments of heated discussion between the judge and both lawyers. This is highly irregular. Constitutional right to exculpatory evidence. Improper channels. When court resumed, Judge Winters looked flushed. The court will not admit the mysteriously obtained security footage. Such evidence must be properly authenticated. Tanya stood firm. Your Honor, we can authenticate it. The school's director is willing to testify. Enough? Counselor. Judge Winters snapped. One more word, and I'll hold you in contempt. The court reporter's fingers paused briefly over her stenotype machine, her eyes widening at the judge's tone. Furthermore, the judge continued, the motion to include the defendant's alibi evidence is denied on procedural grounds. The defense failed to provide proper notice. Tanya couldn't contain herself. We provided notice 3 days ago, well within the required time frame. That's it. Judge Winters banged her gavel. $500, counselor. Any further outbursts and you'll spend the night in jail. The courtroom fell silent. The court reporter's machine continued clicking, recording every word. As Judge Winters shuffled papers on her bench, she leaned toward her microphone, which she thought was off. These people always think they can get away with everything, she muttered. The court reporter's hands froze. She glanced up at the judge, then down at her machine, confirming that the comment had been recorded in the official transcript. Marcus watched as the woman made a small mark next to the statement in her notes. After the hearing, Tanya was fuming. That was completely inappropriate. She's not even pretending to be fair. What do we do now? Marcus asked, trying to keep his voice steady. Tanya's phone buzzed with a text message. It was from the court reporter. Need to speak with you. It's important. Meet me at Carter's coffee shop in 30 minutes. Tanya looked at Marcus with determination in her eyes. We fight back, with the truth. Carter's coffee shop sat across from the courthouse, a small sanctuary where legal professionals often gathered between hearings. Tanya arrived first, choosing a corner table away from the windows. She ordered a coffee and waited anxiously. 5 minutes later, the court reporter, Diane Miller, hurried in. She was in her 50s with graying hair and looked nervously over her shoulder before sitting down. Thank you for meeting me, Diane said in a hushed voice. I've been court reporting for 22 years. I've never done anything like this before. Like what exactly? Tanya asked. Diane pulled out a small USB drive. This contains today's transcript. Judge Winters' comment about these people is in there. But there's more. For the past month, I've been documenting every inappropriate comment she's made when she thinks her microphone is off. Tanya's eyes widened. Is that legal? Everything said in open court is part of the official record, even if she thinks it's private. I'm just doing my job. Diane slid the drive across the table. There's a pattern here. I've already sent a copy to the Judicial Ethics Committee. Meanwhile, across town, Marcus sat with his mother at their kitchen table. His younger sister was working on homework nearby. I'm scared, Mom, Marcus admitted. What if nobody believes me? His mother squeezed his hand. The truth always comes out eventually. We just have to stay strong until it does. The doorbell rang. Marcus's mother opened it to find Coach Williams and another young man. Sorry to bother you, Coach Williams said. This is Kyle Richardson. He needs to tell Marcus something important. Kyle was a senior at Westside High, known for his rebellious reputation. He fidgeted nervously as he sat down. I know who vandalized the school, Kyle blurted out. It was Jake Preston. He did it to get back at the principal for suspending him. He wore a black hoodie to look like you, Marcus. He knew you had practice that evening. Why are you telling us this now? Marcus's mother asked. Kyle looked ashamed. I was there when he planned it. I didn't think he'd let someone else take the blame, but when I saw what was happening to Marcus... He paused. It's not right. Will you tell this to my lawyer? Marcus asked. And the police? Kyle nodded slowly. Yeah, I should have done it sooner. Back at the courthouse, a young law clerk named Michael Chen sat at his desk, reviewing Judge Winters' upcoming cases. As the judge's newest clerk, he was often assigned weekend work organizing case files. While searching for a document, Michael accidentally opened a folder on the judge's computer labeled Personal. Inside was a series of email exchanges between Judge Winters and School Superintendent Robert Phillips. Need to make an example of the Johnson case, one email from Phillips read. Send a message to that neighborhood. Judge Winters had replied, Don't worry, he'll get what he deserves. I'll make sure of it. Michael felt his heart racing. Judges weren't supposed to discuss cases with outside parties, especially not to plan outcomes in advance. This was serious misconduct. He quickly took screenshots and emailed them to his personal account. Then he deleted the evidence of his snooping from the computer. That evening, Michael paced his apartment, debating what to do. His career was just beginning. Reporting a judge could destroy his future in law, but staying silent meant allowing an innocent teenager to be wrongfully punished. He picked up his phone and called the state's anonymous judicial misconduct hotline. I need to report evidence of bias and misconduct by Judge Eleanor Winters, he said. It's regarding the case of Marcus Johnson. Across town, Tanya was reviewing Diane's transcripts when her phone rang. It was an official from the Judicial Ethics Committee. Ms. Rodriguez, we've received multiple reports about Judge Winters' conduct in the Johnson case. We're opening a formal investigation, and we'd like to speak with you. Tanya smiled. I'll be there first thing tomorrow morning, and I'm bringing evidence. The courtroom was packed on Monday morning. Word had spread about the controversy surrounding Marcus's case. Local reporters occupied the back row, notebooks ready. Judge Winters seemed irritated by the crowd as she took her seat at the bench. Let's proceed with jury selection, she announced, avoiding eye contact with anyone in the gallery. Marcus leaned toward Tanya. Is she allowed to continue with the case if she's under investigation? The ethics committee works quietly, Tanya whispered. Unless they've officially suspended her, she can keep presiding. But we have more support than you realize. Throughout jury selection, Judge Winters repeatedly rejected Tanya's challenges to potential jurors who expressed biased views. By lunchtime, the jury consisted of 8 white members, 2 Asian Americans, and 2 Hispanic individuals. Not a single black juror, Tanya noted to Marcus during the break. That's no accident. When the trial resumed, the prosecutor presented the school principal as his first witness. The damage to our arts wing was extensive, Principal Hoffman testified. Spray paint covered 3 hallways of murals that students had created over years. Replacing them cost over $10,000. During cross-examination, Tanya approached carefully. Principal Hoffman, did the security cameras capture the actual vandalism? Yes, but the footage was grainy. Was the perpetrator's face visible in that footage? The principal shifted uncomfortably, not clearly. So how was Marcus identified as a suspect? The build and hoodie matched, and he had been in the building earlier for basketball practice. Judge Winters interrupted. Ms. Rodriguez, stick to relevant questions. Your Honor, establishing how my client was identified is absolutely relevant, Tanya countered. The judge glared. Move on. Throughout the afternoon, this pattern continued. Judge Winters allowed the prosecutor to ask leading questions but objected whenever Tanya approached important points. The jury noticed the uneven treatment, with several members exchanging glances. During the testimony of the police officer who arrested Marcus, something unexpected happened. Officer Barrett, did you view all the security footage from that evening? Tanya asked. Yes, ma'am. Including footage showing someone else committing the vandalism. The officer looked confused. I'm not sure what you're referring to. Tanya approached with a document. This is the evidence log you signed, listing security footage from East Hallway camera, 8:42 p.m. That footage shows someone of different height and build than Marcus. Why wasn't this included in the evidence provided to the defense? The prosecutor jumped up. Objection. This wasn't in discovery. Because you withheld it, Tanya fired back. I have a sworn affidavit from Kyle Richardson confessing he witnessed Jake Preston committing this vandalism specifically to frame Marcus. The courtroom erupted. Judge Winters banged her gavel repeatedly. Order. Order in the court. When the noise subsided, Judge Winters' face was flushed with anger. This trial will recess until tomorrow morning. Both counsel in my chambers now. Inside the judge's chambers, the confrontation escalated quickly. This is highly improper, Ms. Rodriguez, Judge Winters fumed. Introducing new evidence mid-trial. Evidence your office and the prosecutor deliberately withheld, Tanya interrupted. Along with the emails between you and Superintendent Phillips discussing how you plan to make an example of Marcus. The judge's face went pale. What are you talking about? The Judicial Ethics Committee has copies of everything, Tanya continued calmly. They're meeting as we speak. The prosecutor looked stunned. Judge, I had no knowledge of any communications between you and the superintendent. Judge Winters composed herself quickly. These are baseless accusations. We will continue the trial tomorrow, and I'll consider sanctions against defense counsel for these outrageous claims. As they left the chambers, Michael Chen, the law clerk, watched from his desk. He had made the right decision, no matter what happened next. The courthouse steps were crowded with reporters the next morning. News of possible judicial misconduct had spread overnight. Marcus and his mother pushed through the crowd, heads down, as journalists shouted questions. No comment until after today's proceedings, Tanya told the reporters firmly, guiding her client inside. In the hallway outside Courtroom 7, they found an unexpected sight. Kyle Richardson stood nervously next to a tall teenager with blonde hair, Jake Preston. Coach Williams stood with them, arms crossed. What's going on? Marcus asked. Jake has something to say, Coach Williams explained. The blonde teen stepped forward, eyes on the floor. I did it. I vandalized the school. I was mad about my suspension and... He hesitated. I knew you had practiced that night. I wore a black hoodie like yours. Why come forward now? Tanya asked. My parents found the spray paint cans in my room when they heard about Marcus getting charged. Jake shrugged. They made me tell the truth. Tanya quickly took out her phone and recorded Jake's confession. We need to bring this to the prosecutor immediately. Inside the courtroom, the atmosphere was tense. Judge Winters appeared distracted, checking her phone repeatedly before court was called to session. Before we continue, Tanya announced once proceedings began, the defense has important new evidence. The actual perpetrator of the vandalism has come forward with a full confession. She played the video of Jake's confession. The jury watched intently. Several members nodded, as if confirming suspicions they already had. The prosecutor stood. Your Honor, in light of this new evidence, the state requests a brief recess to investigate the validity of this confession. Judge Winters seemed flustered. Granted, 30-minute recess. As the judge rose to leave, a woman in a formal suit entered the courtroom, accompanied by 2 court officials. She approached the bench and handed Judge Winters an envelope. What's happening? Marcus whispered. That's Judith Malone, head of the Judicial Ethics Committee, Tanya explained quietly. Things are about to get interesting. The courtroom remained silent as Judge Winters read the document. Her face grew increasingly red. Finally, she looked up, her expression a mixture of fury and fear. This court will recess until further notice, she announced abruptly, then marched toward her chambers. Judith Malone followed her, along with the court officials. The courtroom buzzed with speculation. 15 minutes later, Judith Malone returned without the judge. She approached the bench and spoke to the bailiff, who nodded gravely. All rise, the bailiff called out, but instead of Judge Winters, an elderly man in judicial robes entered. I am Judge Robert Thompson, he announced. I have been assigned to take over this case effective immediately. Judge Winters has been temporarily relieved of her duties pending an ethics investigation. Gasps echoed through the courtroom. Marcus stared in disbelief. In light of the disruption, Judge Thompson continued, Court is adjourned until tomorrow at 9 a.m., when we will address the new evidence properly. As people began filing out, Diane, the court reporter, caught Tanya's eye and gave a small nod of acknowledgement. Outside in the hallway, the prosecutor approached Tanya and Marcus. In view of the confession and the unusual circumstances, he said carefully, the state is considering dropping all charges. I'll need to speak with the DA, but I wanted you to know. Tanya nodded. Thank you for doing the right thing. As they walked toward the exit, Michael Chen hurried up to them, speaking quietly. She's furious, he whispered. When they served her the suspension notice, she said she'd make sure that boy still paid for what he did. She tried to delete emails from her computer, but it was too late. Thank you for your courage, Tanya told him. Without people like you and Diane speaking up, this might have ended very differently. Outside, Marcus finally let out the breath he'd been holding. Is it really over? Tanya put a hand on his shoulder. The case against you? Soon, but the case against Judge Winters? That's just beginning. The morning sun filtered through the windows of Courtroom 5, different from the usual Courtroom 7 where Marcus's case had begun. Spectators filled every seat, and reporters lined the back wall. The atmosphere felt lighter, more hopeful. Marcus sat beside Tanya at the defense table, wearing a blue button-up shirt his mother had bought specially for today. His hands were steady for the first time in weeks. All rise for the Honorable Judge Robert Thompson, the bailiff announced. The elderly judge entered with a deliberate pace. Unlike Judge Winters, he smiled briefly at the gallery before taking his seat. Good morning, he began. Before we proceed, I want to address the unusual circumstances surrounding this case. I have reviewed all evidence and transcripts overnight. I take the integrity of this court very seriously. Judge Thompson turned toward the prosecution table. Mr. Davis, does the state wish to make a statement? The prosecutor stood. Yes, Your Honor. After careful review of the new evidence, including the confession of Jake Preston and the supporting witness statement from Kyle Richardson, the state moves to dismiss all charges against Marcus Johnson. A wave of whispers swept through the courtroom. Marcus's mother covered her mouth, tears forming in her eyes. Furthermore, Davis continued, the district attorney's office extends its apologies to Mr. Johnson and his family for the hardship this case has caused them. Judge Thompson nodded. Motion granted. All charges against Marcus Johnson are hereby dismissed with prejudice. He struck his gavel once, the sound crisp and final. Marcus turned to Tanya in disbelief as his mother rushed forward to embrace him. His teachers and coach applauded from the gallery. It's over, Tanya said, squeezing his shoulder. Really over. After the courtroom cleared, Tanya received a text message from Judith Malone asking to meet outside. Marcus and his family joined her on the courthouse steps. I wanted to update you personally, Judith explained. Judge Winters has been suspended pending a full investigation. We found evidence of bias in multiple cases, not just Marcus's. What happens now? Marcus's mother asked. Court officers discovered Judge Winters attempting to access and delete case files last night after her suspension. She was escorted from the building and is now facing potential criminal charges for obstruction of justice and tampering with records. A police car pulled up to the courthouse. 2 officers escorted Judge Winters from the building. Her hands weren't cuffed, but the sight was shocking nonetheless. The former judge kept her head down as photographers captured the moment. The system worked slowly, Judith admitted, but it worked. Thanks to people with courage who spoke up. That afternoon, Marcus's family hosted a small celebration at their home. His teachers, coach, and friends gathered to support him. Kyle Richardson came too, still visibly uncomfortable but determined to make amends. I should have said something sooner, Kyle told Marcus. I was scared. But you could speak up, Marcus replied. That's what matters. Diane, the court reporter, stopped by briefly with a gift, a leather-bound journal. For when you're ready to write about this experience, she explained. Your story might help someone else someday. Michael Chen, the law clerk, called Tanya to say he'd been offered a position with the Judicial Ethics Committee after his internship ended. They said we need more people willing to hold power accountable, he told her proudly. As evening fell, the reporters and well-wishers finally left. Marcus sat on the porch steps with his mother, watching the sunset. I was so afraid, he admitted. Not just of going to juvenile detention, but that people would always see me differently. His mother put her arm around him. Sometimes the hardest battles leave you stronger. You stood your ground. You didn't give up. Marcus nodded slowly. I think I know what I want to study in college now. What's that? Law, he said simply, because the system only works when good people make sure it does. Inside the house, the news played quietly on TV. Judge Eleanor Winters has been formally charged with judicial misconduct and obstruction of justice, following a case that has shocked the community. 1 year had passed since Marcus Johnson's case made headlines across the state. The morning sun streamed through the windows of the community center as people filed in for the panel discussion on judicial reform. The room quickly filled to capacity. Marcus adjusted his tie nervously. At 18, he was now a freshman at State University, majoring in pre-law. His mother sat in the front row, beaming with pride. "Ready?" Tanya Rodriguez asked, straightening her blazer. Marcus nodded. "As ready as I'll ever be." The moderator stepped up to the microphone. "Welcome everyone to our community forum, ensuring justice for all. Today we have several speakers who experienced firsthand how bias can affect our legal system and how speaking up can make a difference." The audience applauded as Marcus, Tanya, Diane Miller, and Michael Chen took their seats on stage. 1 year ago, a case that started in a high school hallway ended up exposing serious flaws in our justice system, the moderator began. Since then, much has changed. On the projector screen behind them, newspaper headlines appeared. Former JGG Winters PLEADSQLT2 misconduced TAGRGS. State Supreme Court NNOUNCS INU Judicial Oversight Measures. Review of 200 plus cases ANDLET by DSGRACDGGG underway. Diane spoke first, explaining how she documented Judge Winters' inappropriate comments for months before finding the courage to report them. "Court reporters are supposed to record everything," she explained, "but for years, we were told to ignore certain comments. That culture of silence protected bad behavior." Michael shared his experience as a whistleblower. "The hardest part was knowing my career might be over before it began, but I couldn't let an innocent person suffer just to protect my future." When Marcus's turn came, he spoke clearly and confidently. "A year ago, I was just trying to get through high school and apply to colleges. Then suddenly I was facing criminal charges for something I didn't do." He paused. "What scared me most wasn't just the false accusation. It was learning that the person with the most power in that courtroom had already decided I was guilty because of how I looked." The audience listened in complete silence. Former Judge Winters is now serving a 2-year suspended sentence and can never serve as a judge again, Marcus continued. "But this isn't about one bad judge, it's about building a system where bias has nowhere to hide." After the panel, a group of law students surrounded Marcus. "We're starting a group that reviews cases for signs of judicial bias," one explained. "Would you consider being our advisor?" Across the room, Tanya spoke with the new chief judge of the district court. "The state has implemented mandatory bias training for all judges now," the chief judge explained. "And we've established an anonymous reporting system for court staff to flag concerning patterns." As the crowd thinned, Superintendent Phillips approached Marcus cautiously. The man looked much older than he had a year ago. "I wanted to apologize in person," he said quietly. "I was wrong to pressure Judge Winters about your case. I've resigned my position, effective next month." Marcus nodded, accepting the apology with grace beyond his years. Later that evening, Marcus and his family gathered for dinner with Tanya, Diane, and Michael. Kyle Richardson was there too, now studying criminal justice at the community college. "I got accepted to the judicial intern program," Michael announced. "They're specifically looking for people with demonstrated ethical courage." Tanya raised her glass. "To courage in all its forms." As they celebrated, Marcus's phone buzzed with a text message. It was from his professor. "Saw you on the news. Your personal statement about why you want to become a lawyer makes perfect sense now. The law school admissions committee will be impressed." Marcus smiled. The journey that began with an unjust accusation had transformed into something powerful. The system hadn't been perfect, but good people had made it work. And someday, he would be one of those people, ensuring justice for others who might not have had his support network. Outside the window, the sunset painted the sky in shades of hope.